show, but looking at 2025 and looking at this offensive lineman class, what if I told you that Rob, being 6'6", 330, isn't the tallest nor the largest in this class? Let's go ahead and look at these four offensive linemen as a whole. Matai Jefferson, 6'4", 350.
What a unit.
Yeah.
6'4", 350 is nuts.
350 is ridiculous. Maki Stewart, 6'6", 290. Alema Ayusua, 6'7", 292. And, of course, Rob Lapuahu, who we just talked about, 6'6", 330. Do you notice a trend here?
They're all really big and they're all really big. They're tall and they're wide.
Yeah. And so that is just such a fun, it's like, and it's not like ASU is going out of their way not to recruit size, but it's so fun to see a recurring trend and something that this recruiting staff is going after on the offensive line. And obviously it seems like the obvious thing to do. Like, go get the big guy, but it's not the easiest thing to do.
It's not the easiest. And also a lot of the times what we think is the obvious thing to do is not what people do.
Yeah.
Right. And we come up here and we bang the table, man, we think they're doing it right at ASU. We think they're building right. And look, you're now getting some of the results and you're talking about these highly recruited prospects coming in here and choosing Arizona State. But it's not just the stars. Right? It's not just, what's your national ranking? It's also what can we mold you into? What are your building blocks? And one of the first things you said is you can't teach size. So to find people that you believe in, that you know that their size, if you get them in your doors in Tempe with your strength and conditioning and your coaching, it doesn't matter if they're a low 3-star, right? Compared to a high 3-star because that range is so wide.
Yeah.
You can mold them and turn them into whatever you want them to, as long as they have the mindset, which I guarantee you, and I this is never something that I will waver from. There is no chance in hell that this staff is going to recruit anybody and actually have them come here that does not want to be here.
You know who's licking his chops right now, though? Is Saga, because somebody mentioned it in the chat. He's had really good offensive lines in the past, and obviously that comes because of where he was before at West Point. He was a coach at Army. You think they like running the ball? You think they like mixing up in the trenches? Like that is such an identity they want ASU football to have. You know, that is the ASU football. One of the things Kenny mentioned, and when we were talking about this earlier, or we're talking to him earlier this spring, was the some guys dropping and some guys gaining weight and the how that's going to help them and why they did that. And one of the things they mentioned was Cam Scadaboo dropping weight. And the reason why they wanted him to do that was because they didn't have as many explosive runs as they would want to. And Cam will, Scad will give somebody a truck whenever he wants, but he couldn't get to that next level. And that's not an indictment on Scad. It's just the archetype of a player he was.
Yeah.
This year they want him to be a more explosive guy, and more explosive guys don't get explosive plays without big holes.
Right.
And that is what's exciting is this team trying to find an identity. I am such a sucker for a team that establishes the run early.
Yeah.
And ASU football has not been a team that could do that in a couple 3-4 years. The last time I remember that was when they had a 1-2 duo with Rashad White and Chip Trainman, and even then it was more of a pass catching backfield. This is exciting.
No, absolutely. And you're right with the whole scat thing as well. You don't feel confident in telling him to lose some weight and to try to be more explosive if you think that he's going to get hit behind the line of scrimmage every time.
That's a great point.
Right? You're not going to tell somebody, we want you to be faster and quicker and more dynamic. And even if you look at the running backs that they have gotten either in the transfer portal or through recruiting, you don't look at like a near fullback type, someone that's just going to go and bash your brains and even looking like a Raleek Brown, right? Like those types of weapons, that stuff, it's not that it doesn't work if you don't have an offensive line, but it's just taken to such a next level when your quarterback, whoever it might be, right now it's going to be Sam most likely, but you never know. And you don't know if they're going to add anybody, but whatever's going on there doesn't matter as much as what's going on right in front of them.
Yeah.
Because quarterbacks who aren't as great look a lot better when there's a really good offensive line. Yeah. Like you look at what Washington did on their way to the college football playoffs and everything last year. They had the best offensive line in the country.
Yep.
And it's part of the reason why PHNX looked so good.
Exactly.
It was because he was just protected all the time.
So many people also, like being close to ASU football, ball knowers will say, you throw a lot of the offensive player stats away from last year because of how unique the circumstances were. They had, 8+ scholarship linemen go down at some point.
It was basically like every other player
during the year. I think the total, I think 9 scholarship linemen went down at some point last year and multiple for the season. That doesn't happen. That's not a normal thing that happens in college football. And knock on wood, you hope that it averages out, and this year they can stay relatively healthy, because you're not going to stay completely healthy, especially in an offensive line room. Like, that's one of the most vulnerable positions in football because of how much they're mixing it up in the trenches and their weights and everything. But you could throw a lot of the offensive stats away last year, and the fact that some of these guys were able to garner the amount of yards they were behind an offensive line that was so banged up and misfitty. Like, you get a good group, a well-coached group, an athletic group, a improved group, a group that is now going to learn from, 1, their mistakes, but 2, from their leader in Lee Fautanu, who is arguably the best center in the Big 12 and the top 10 in the country. That's what gets me excited about next year. That's what gets me hyped about. I don't care who Kenny throws out at quarterback, because I know that they're going to have a better shot at getting the ball away and getting it to the playmakers on this team than last year. Because so many times last year it was like, just get the ball to Badge. Just get the ball to Scat and let them go. And they couldn't even do that.
No, they couldn't. And not only can you throw the actual on paper numbers for a lot of offensive players out, when you talk about coaching and you talk about some of the stuff that Kenny tried to pull off, you have to imagine that he knew he was handcuffed by a certain sense because of sheerly the amount of injuries, not just to the offensive line, but a main part of it, but the quarterback room as well. Like, having all of that and to still overcome and to put together some of the performances they had. I mean, I know we joke about it, but like Scat and Conyers were like quarterbacks for a large portion of last season.
Look at the UCLA game. Look at how weird they played that UCLA game. Think about that. Like, that was a moment where Kenny was like, I don't know what to do anymore. We can't play traditional football. We have to get creative. We have to be weird. We have to run a T-bone. We have to put a running back at quarterback, because our offensive line isn't healthy enough to play football at the Division I level. We have to beat them with chess. And that's what they did. If Kenny doesn't have to play chess and can just play fun, aired out football and be unique, and he knows that a guard can pull his left tackle and there can be a swing screen, and you can be confident that if the swing's to the right and that left guard, left tackle will pick up the blitzers that the guys are leaving. That's exciting football. That's what I'm stoked for, is you don't have to rely on guys that probably shouldn't be playing right now.
Yeah, and you don't have to rely almost like at a certain point.
Couldn't kick field goals, as Sharon says.
Right, yeah, you couldn't kick field goals. Your offense got almost gimmicky of sorts, but not in an indictment on Kenny, but in a necessity way. And that's an indictment on what happened overall. Things completely out of their control for sure, but the entire season. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, you were getting put in positions that were so bad, and not even just, hey, like on the field, like, hey, right before your season, I know that maybe a lot of fans weren't expecting bowl eligibility, but we're pulling that right out from the rug from underneath you. Like, it was such a stacked deck against succeeding at all last year. And the fact that we can even look back and say, hey, that could be built upon, that could be built upon, that could be built upon, is massive. But at the end of the day, when you circle back to it, last season would look 10 times different if they had half the amount of injuries on the offensive line. It doesn't even necessarily turn into actual wins. The wins might stay the same, but the way that those games went down, the way that they had to approach everything, and the way that it was coached, completely different. If you had 3 guys on that line who were consistent, healthy, and trusted each other, and like you said, with depth, like, we're talking about multiple guys who are massive. Right? We're talking about big dudes, and we're talking about depth, because somebody's going to get injured, and it sucks. And maybe ASU has the first season ever where no football player ever gets injured, but it's going to happen. Yeah. But it simply is far-fetched for it to happen on that level again. So it's exciting to think, okay, Kenny's going to have a more even playing field, a better, more complete roster, and his second year here and actually implementing his system.